floor.
Oh.
Over the years, it was home to the Poland Spring Post Office, WMTW TV Channel 8, and an antique shop. In 1981, it was fully remodeled and renamed the Presidential Inn after so many presidents had stayed at Poland Spring. It is the last of the 3 original hotel buildings on the property and the only one that still stands. So winter recreation was also very popular on the hill for the guests staying at the Mansion House. This photo is from 1947. By the 1920s, the toboggan slide had been complemented by a ski tow and large ski trestle on the property. Even JFK visited Poland Spring in 1923 to enjoy some skiing in winter in Maine with his family. Do any of you remember the movie Balto? So, Elizabeth Ricker, Edward Payson's daughter-in-law, was a well-known sled dog musher. In the 1920s, she helped attract several dog races to the area using Poland Spring as a base. She had become friends with Leonard Seppala, the famous driver of the sled dog team that delivered the diphtheria serum to Nome, Alaska in 1925. Seppala and his dogs were quite an attraction for the guests staying at the resort. In order to recoup some of the cost of transportation, Seppala allowed guests to take sled dog rides for a small fee. Eventually, Elizabeth was given Togo, the lead sled dog for much of the treacherous Alaskan journey. Togo died at Poland Spring in 1929 at 16 years old. So how does this relate to Balto? Gunnar Kaysen and his sled dog Balto became known for running the final leg of the run, while 12-year-old Togo and Seppala ran the longest leg of the run. So this photo shows Leonard Seppala driving his sled on Ring Pond. So this is my favorite part of our presentation. I pretty much grew up in this building. So this is the Maine State Building. It was built for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. It was built to show off Maine's craftsmanship and the quality of Maine's resources. The building was designed by Charles Sumner Frost. He was a Lewiston, Maine native. All the materials were shipped out to Chicago. The building was built there. It stood for 6 months, the duration of the fair. And how did it make its home to Poland Spring? Well, that's because Hiram Ricker had his display of Poland water at the World's Fair. As I said earlier, he won awards for having great medicinal values. And all the buildings at the end of the fair, they were set to be destroyed. There was no use for them anymore. Hiram Ricker found that out, and he didn't like the idea, so he bought this Maine State Building from the state of Maine at a cost of $30,000. He then was told that he had 18 days to take the building down and remove it from Chicago, because the only way to get it out of Chicago was by train, and they were ripping up the railroad bed in 18 days. So Hiram got together his group of men with his lead carpenter, Forrest Walker, at Poland Spring. They went and took the building down piece by piece, marked each piece to make sure they knew where it went when it came back here. They put it on this 16-car freight train that was especially designed for the Maine State Building. And even way back then in 1893, they still were very fond of marketing. And there was a sign on the side of the train that said, "This building contains the Maine State Building, and this is heading for Poland Spring, Maine." So the cost of transportation was $3,000 from Chicago to Poland Spring. The train stopped in Danville Junction, and from there they put the building on horse and ox cart and brought it to the top of Ricker Hill. So the cornerstone was laid on August 14th, 1894, and the building was rededicated July 1st, 1895, which also marked 100 years that the Rickers had settled in Poland Spring.
So as Laura was telling you, religion was very important at the Poland Spring grounds, and the guest would have church services in either dining room at Poland Springs. And little boy's name is Hopa. is the digging of the first to get ready to build the chapel. But the incredible part of this is the fact that the house guest, which they don't do that anymore, gave the money to build this beautiful chapel. And it was finished in 1912. This is a picture of the grounds in 1930. Something you don't see now is all the farmland. You know, back then, transportation is not what it is now, and so they tried to produce as much of their own food as possible. They bought their milk from Shipman Farm. They tried to do as much locally as possible. So, we kind of jumped ahead here to 1962. So, in between this and what you saw in 1930, the heyday of Poland Spring was considered 1927. That was the year Lindbergh came there. That was before the Great Depression. Things were just peachy. And they had 3 hotels, they were always full, they were doing great, and then the world changed. We had the Great Depression. The rich did not want to be seen anymore. They wanted to go to their private enclaves, and they wanted not to be in the public eye anymore. And then World War II came. And there's a Ricker in the audience, actually. George Ricker told me he knew things were going bad when they no longer took care of the boardwalks. And I thought that was a simple way of saying it, but that's what happens. I went to visit the Balsams a few years back with John Skinner, and the buildings hadn't been painted, and I was like, something's going on here. And that's what happened. So the Rickers had taken loans for their hotel in Georgia. They had taken loans for the Ricker Inn, which became the Presidential Inn, and they couldn't pay the banks anymore. And so the banks took over. The Rickers stayed in charge until 1944, until right to the end of World War II. And then the banks ran Poland Spring. We don't know a lot about the late 40s, 50s. We hear from a lot of employees, but we don't hear from much of the management side of what was going on in the background. But their savior came in 1962 with this gentleman here, Saul Feldman. Saul had run a hotel in Gloucester, Massachusetts. It was very small, on the ocean, but beautiful, beautiful location. He had grown up in Boston, knew a lot of people, and he knew how to get money. And there was a gentleman there that owned the milk works. This gentleman's name was Freelander. He helped him get the money to buy Poland Spring. Saul bought 5,000 acres, over 100 buildings, for $365,000. But you got to remember, they were in tough shape. They were in very tough shape. And so this was his first endeavor, was to build a swimming pool next to the Poland Spring House. The guests had always gone to the beach house. That's the first thing he did. Next thing he did is he started inviting very famous people to Poland Spring. And I know most of you are of the age you would have remembered Route 66. So Route 66 had 2 episodes at Poland Spring. And he, at those, oh, sorry, I get talking, I forget. So this is a picture of Saul and his son-in-law Lauren, Tootie, his daughter-in-law, and Michael Feldman. Michael is on our board of directors. The others have passed. So the next year, 1963, he builds a modern building in Poland Spring with private bathrooms. And he opens up this executive inn. People start flocking back to Poland Spring. Jack Parr, as I said, Joan Crawford, Route 66. And he gets famous people to talk about the water. Jimmy Durante. What's the woman's name?
Mae West.
Mae West, yes. So Mae West starts promoting the water. This is a picture of the Route 66 gang. Can you tell me who they are?
Marty Milner.
Okay, who else?
George Maharis.
What?
George Maharis.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay,
And Tony Feldman.
yes.
Yes.
Oops, gotta back up.
Just one forward.
Joan Crawford. I understand she was quite blush. So another great thing that happened that kind of fell into Saul's lap on this one was the Sonny Liston fight in Lewiston, Maine. We just celebrated the 50-year anniversary. We've actually been asked to use our lobby of our presidential inn for the movie that's going to be made about the Sonny Liston fight. And who's the other guy?
Cassius Clay.
So that's a picture of them training at the Mansion House.
So here's a picture of Jack Parr. I bet most of you know that at one point he owned Channel 8 Studios. So he would stay in room 632. That's why it says up on the sign, Jack Parr room that way. So David, his father, worked at Channel 8, and if you ever get a chance to come see our fire film of the night of the Poland Spring House fire, David's father,
His voice is on there.
her voice is on
He's
there.
commentating.
Yeah, he was commentating part of it, yeah. Okay.
So in 1966, Poland Spring became home to the nation's largest women's training center of the Job Corps under President Lyndon Johnson. The mission was to offer a residential training program for women ages 16 to 21 who were without jobs and the financial means to further their education to acquire a job. The Mansion House, the Ricker Inn, Poland Spring House, and even the new Executive Inn were all filled to the brim with these ladies. Even the main state building was packed up and used as storage during those years. In 1969, with the new administration in Washington, the Poland Spring branch of the Job Corps was disbanded. Most buildings were in great disrepair. The Mansion House was never to be used again. Back to you.
Okay. So during the Job Corps years, as Laura said, the buildings were destroyed pretty much, but one of the things that happened, and there's a gentleman here that can talk about that actually, is before the Job Corps moved in, they had to get rid of all their antiques, and there was some unbelievable sales, and this gentleman bought some of the stuff. And we're slowly getting some of it back, donated to the Maine State Building. But the only building that was built during those years was the Lodge. The Lodge on Route 26 was built to be separated from the main top of the hill because the girls were up on top learning their new trades, and the government wanted the entire top of the hill. The only thing that Saul was able to keep was the golf course. So he needed a building to manage the golf course from. The golf course was still very active. So he built this building with 25 hotel rooms, a dining room that would seat 100, and a snack bar, pro shop, locker rooms, and such. So when you pass the property, many people think that's the only thing that's really there. So after the Job Corps left, what's next? Buildings were in disarray. The bedding in the Poland Spring House was army cots. None of the fancy stuff was left. And Mr. Feldman rented the Poland Spring House that next summer, 1970, to the Maharishi Mutt, here in that picture, this picture. The theory was that he would come to Maine and get more disciples to believe in his ways and start spreading the word across the United States about his beliefs. I've talked to some of the people that were there. It was an all-vegan culture, and so the Fellmans cooked for all these people that came, and there was over 1,000 believers that came. They had to eat all vegetables. So now we go to the next year. This is a great picture of what the buildings look like. Some were falling down, some were, my husband would tell a funny story about one day he was sitting in Saul's office negotiating something, and two rough-looking guys walked in and said, "Our house is falling down." And Saul says, "Do you have a jack?" "Well, yeah." "Well, take the jack and put the jack under the corner of the house and jack it up." And they walked out and they did just that thing. So it's definitely been a challenge. But I came there to work in 1971 at 16. I'm in the back of the mill. Saul rented the property to Horace Burns and Herbie Spitzer. They came with wonderful ideas how they were going to turn Poland Spring around. They moved in May, and by August 1st they were broke. So I was very lucky. I continued with my job with Mr. Fellman. He took the hotel back over, and he was out looking for another person to lease or buy Poland Spring. Mel Robbins, totally self-educated, started working in an ice cream shop, started to become a pharmacist, found out he was better at selling than doing anything, ended up to be a furniture salesman, then a land salesman, and at this point in his life he was tired of working for other people. He had this wonderful idea for Poland Spring that he would turn it into condominiums. There was 5,000 acres. He had developed land in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. He thought that he could take those 5,000 acres, divvy them all up, put homes everywhere, put ski chalets, turn it into a ski mountain again. Great ideas. Got there, and of course he didn't really have anybody's money but other people's money. He had 10 investors with $10,000 each, and by August 1st it was all gone. He had $7,000 of his own money, and Mr. Fellman had nobody else to rent it to. So he said, "Tell you what, I'll give you, you keep it going, you give me 20% and you can stay." And that's how we ended up staying there. So Mel put on his thinking cap, and he came up with something that Poland Springs was not. You know, everybody was trying to sell Poland Springs as this very fancy, ritzy, only kings and queens come, and he's like, you know, when Mel tried to run it, lost all the money. He did 24-hour room service, bellman at the door. I mean, you couldn't, there was practically a waitress for every table. So he changed it into buffets. The telephones got pulled out of the rooms, the ice machines got pulled out of the hallways, and he went the budget way. That first summer that I had worked there, Saul and the previous owner was lucky to have 20 people in the hotel. Now we had full houses, and it was amazing because people were looking for a way to get out of the city, have fun, and we have all these wonderful amenities, but at that point we didn't have great buildings. And he came up with theme weekends, like a corn shucking weekend. Wouldn't you all want to go to a corn shucking weekend? We had vow renewals, so that beautiful chapel, we could do vow renewals for 100 couples at once. Who'd ever done that? We got covered all the way to Australia talking about Mel's vow renewals. And he got a little full of himself, and he rented the lodge from Mr. Fellman, which was still operating the golf course, out of there. And Saul said, "Ooh, wait a minute, I need my golf course." So they ended up moving Saul's golf course back to the Poland Spring House. So now the pro shop is in the basement of Poland Spring House where it used to be. And